And now for our program. The organizer and moderator of tonight's program is Dr. Rose Tremlaw. Dr. Rose Tremlaw is the Charles A. Dana Associate Professor of History at Davidson College. Dr. Stremlaw received her PhD from UNC Chapel Hill. She is completing her second book about a Cherokee woman who survived the Trail of Tears, participated in the California Gold Rush, and witnessed the overthrow of the Kingdom of Hawaii. Look for Barbara Hildebrand, A Cherokee Life in the Age of American Empire in bookstores in early 2026. She's also co-authoring Sovereign Kin, A History of the Cherokee Nation. Look for that in 2027-ish. And Rose is the founder and college coordinator. And I am going to butcher how this is said, everyone, so I apologize. But the Judah Bahaseri Kus Rahir, and I'm sure I'm going to be corrected 12 times over for how I said that. Davidson College's collaboration with the Catawba Nation. I am very, very honored to turn this program over to Professor Rose Stremlaw, who will not only say those words correctly, but who will also get us started.
Greetings, everyone. Thank you for being here on a Monday evening. And thank you to Judith Rolls and to Adam Barton in the offices of alumni and family engagements and events and programming for their work organizing tonight's event. As a history professor who does not claim to be a tech specialist, it is just such a comfort to have folks like Judith and Adam at the wheel of the car as we're going on this adventure together. I also want to thank my colleagues at the Catawba Nation and here at Davidson College, who work together as part of Duta Paheisari Kus Rakare, which means we learn corn together in the Catawba language. Davidson College exists on the ancestral homeland of the Catawba Nation. In addition to other projects and programming that are part of this collaboration and about which Judith will send more information in the follow-up email, we are researching the role of the college's founding families in the illegal seizure of potentially thousands of acres of Catawba land that comprised their reservation in the early 1800s. As we deepen our understanding of our past and embrace the resulting responsibilities in the present, we are committed to supporting Catawba sovereignty. This collaboration, now in its second year, has been a joy. The truth is that we are united by more than our history. We share a commitment to environmental sustainability, to creating opportunities for broad participation in the arts, humanities, and STEM, and for ensuring that young people today and for generations to come have educational opportunities that prepare them for lives of leadership and service. Tonight's guests will help us to understand the importance of land preservation and land back for our Catawba neighbors and inspire us to think about how future collaboration between Davidson College and the Catawba Nation can continue this growth. And now I will introduce our guest panelists. Dr. Winona Hare, a citizen of the Catawba Indian Nation, is a graduate of Clemson University and the Medical University of South Carolina. She has a successful dentistry practice in Rock Hill. In addition to that, she has served her people for over 36 years in a variety of capacities. She is currently the director of the Cultural Division of the Catawba Indian Nation, the Tribal Historic Preservation Officer, and the Native American Graves and Protection Officer. Multiple jobs, which in many communities, multiple people to do, and Winona handles it all. For decades, she has represented her people through participating in art organizations and civil groups throughout Rock Hill, York County, and South Carolina. She's following in the footsteps of her father, Buck George, a statesman who served his people as assistant chief for over 19 years. Dr. Mariah Whitehead, who belongs to the class of 1995, is an ornithologist, professor, and conservation professional. She has worked for almost 20 years in land and water resource protection in the Southeast. Her varied career path has included positions as a bird research scientist in Hawaii, Australia, and the Blue Ridge Mountains, but eventually all of that led her back to her roots as a land conservation specialist in the Southeast, first with the Nature Conservancy, and now as Senior Vice President and Director of Land for the Open Space Institute. She views OSI's collaborations with tribes and Native nations as some of the most important work she has had the privilege to be a part of in her career. Lydia Locklear Canty, a citizen of the Lumbee Nation, previously served as the Deputy Tribal Attorney for the Catawba Nation during the trust process that we're going to be discussing tonight. Lydia earned her Juris Doctorate with a certificate in Indigenous Law from Michigan State University College of Law. Before that, Lydia earned her undergraduate degree at UNC Pembroke in 2014, I believe.
Mhm.
Before I came to Davidson, Lydia was one of my students. I taught her in, I believe, fall 2010, and it is wonderful that the universe has brought us back together this way. Upon graduating from law school, Lydia served tribes at the North Carolina Commission of Indian Affairs before clerking for the Honorable Anita Earls of the North Carolina Supreme Court. Lydia has dedicated her career to protecting tribal sovereignty, including preserving sacred sites. What a treat to have the three of you here with us. And so tonight's format is that we're going to hear some background to the preservation of the King's Landing tract. Then at about 8:15, we will open it up for questions. So let's begin with some background on the Catawba history of this region. The Catawba have called the greater Charlotte-Mecklenburg area their home long before the city of Charlotte and long before Davidson College was established. This is a question to start for Winona. What would you like the audience to know about Catawba history in this region?
Well, we have a very, very long and complex history. So I'd just like to touch on a few things that pertain primarily to King's Bottoms, but I'll just start with a very important treaty, the Treaty of Augusta in 1763, which was signed with the Catawba and included 144,000 square acres of land in what is now York, Lancaster, and Chester. And King's Bottoms, which was formerly known as the Nesbit property, was included in this acreage. But because of the continued encroachment of settlers onto the land, the Catawba made an unheard of action for the times. The Catawba men deeded a large tract of land to Sally New River, wife of General New River, that reserved 550 acres of prime river land in Lancaster, South Carolina. This ensured that this land would not be leased to new settlers. She reserved the land with other women of the nation themselves, their heirs, successors, and assignees. And this was very unusual because this was at a time where women had no status in other cultures, and just the act of being in charge of the land was very impressive. She had the document signed by General New River and other headmen of the tribe, and by 4 of the state-appointed land commissioners in 1796. And it was recorded in Lancaster County Courthouse in 1808. And around 1840, the Indian Removal Act was passed, and at this time there were negotiations with the Catawba, and the treaty was called the Treaty of Nation Ford. The premise of this treaty was that the Catawba were to give up 144,000 acres of land to South Carolina in exchange for money and a new reservation. South Carolina did not honor either of these. Some of the Catawba moved to Cherokee, but when South Carolina tried to move the Catawba to the Cherokee reservation, North Carolina denied them access. And those that had moved soon after came back to South Carolina. But at this time, their land had been dispersed. So in essence, the Catawba were homeless. And a group of citizens called the Friends of the Catawba worked to get 600 acres put into trust for a reservation for the Catawba. And the Treaty of Nation Ford, the thing that is, to me, that is important is that it was an illegal act because of the federal government is the only one that can negotiate treaties with tribes. And South Carolina, of course, was the one that had negotiated this, and therefore that made it an illegal treaty. And that was I guess, Lydia could speak more on this, but it was the backbone of what became a 19-year suit with the state of South Carolina to once again be federally recognized and to right some of the wrongs. So in answer to your question, Rose, the land is very precious to us. It always seems to be something we're always having to work hard to keep. And it's it's very precious to the Catawbas.
And that 144,000 acres, right? That some of that did transfer into the hands of Davidson founders. And so that's one of the processes that we're investigating now is how much and who. Lydia, do you feel comfortable jumping in and giving us some more insight on that land claims case that ultimately resulted in the settlement for the Catawba Nation?
Yeah, I'll touch a little bit on that. And Tanake, hello, and Hawo, thank you so much for putting this panel together. And I want to thank you for that background. And I also want to touch a little bit about Kings Bottom property and why that specific property is important to the Catawba people. But Catawbas have been fighting for their land for over 100 years. And due to encroachment, they kept losing more and more land. And so finally, with the help of the Native American Rights Fund, also known as NARF, in Indian country, the Catawba Nation in the 80s started ramping back up its land claims. And so because you can't have a treaty with a state in the United States, I mean, tribal governments have inherent sovereignty that's not given by the federal or state government. It's inherent, but they have relationships with the federal government and the state government as well. But due to United States case law, a state cannot have a treaty with a Native American tribe in the United States. And so that was not valid. It was void. And the Catawba Nation was in and out of the courts. And so what they ultimately decided on was they would have to sue to get their land back from all of these landowners in South Carolina. And once that started happening, South Carolinians started calling up their representatives and Congress stepped in. And so Congress and the state and the tribe came to the table and negotiated for years on a land settlement claim. And that was ultimately reached in 1993. And so the Catawba Nation had to give up their claims to a lot of their traditional land. And they have a settlement act now. They have one with the state of South Carolina and also with the United States. And so that settlement act put a lot of restrictions on the Catawba Nation, but those settlement acts, you see them more throughout on the East Coast. Tribes have those with the United States. And that is how the Catawba Nation restored their federal recognition. And so now what does that look like? The Catawba Nation has a police department. They can have tribal courts, and they do have a tribal court right now. But that settlement act put some restrictions on the tribe, unfortunately. But I would encourage everyone to Google that the settlement act with the Catawba Nation. It's very interesting to read. But that's something that the nation is always working to get those restrictions lifted. But the Kings Bottom tract specifically and the importance of that property to the nation, there is a clay vein on the property, and I can let Winona speak more to this, but Catawbas are most notably known for their pottery, which dates back more than 6,000 years ago. It's one of the oldest art forms in the country. And so there is Catawbas make their pottery a certain way, and the clay has to come from a Catawba clay vein or clay hole, as they're also called. And so there's one on the Kings Bottom property, and it's been there we know it's been there for hundreds of years because generation after generation has pulled clay from there and passed it down and passed it down the way to do that. So it's such an important piece of property, but also the artifacts that have been found there, the oral storytelling that has gone on through generations in the tribe tells us that one of the most notable chiefs of the Catawba Nation, Chief Notkehe, or King Hagler, as he was also called, possibly lived or his children lived on the property as well. So this property is rich in artifacts. It's rich in just natural resources that the nation is interested in preserving, like river cane. And Winona, I don't know if you want to say more about that, but this King's Bottom it's truly a sacred site to the Catawba Nation, and I would say one of the most sacred sites to the tribe to date.
Yes. I would say, in historic preservation terms, we call it a TCP, traditional cultural property, and for a number of reasons. The archaeology study that was done definitely proved what we had known for quite some time, in that 46 sites were found on the property. One extremely important site is eligible for the National Register of Historic Places, and it's a Catawba Village. It contains architectural features and artifacts around the 1760s. And it shows evidence of pre-colonial habitation, and it is eligible, like I said, for the National Register nomination. But there's also other cultures that interacted. There is a cemetery on that property, which deserves preservation. And of course, there is the farmstead that has been there and came into play during the time. And you can see one of the things that I thought was very interesting is that when the archaeologists did the work, they did find an historic roadbed. And it's also visible on the 1763 Wiley map, and it was used by the inhabitants of the King's Bottom site, Catawba Old Town, and Catawba New Town, as well as all of their visitors, including traders, missionaries, and revolutionaries.
And Winona, I'll add, we have a few slides we can share that show images of Catawba pottery. It's so beautiful and different. I thought folks might like to be able to see a couple of these.
Read my mind, right? Winona or Lydia, would you like to say anything about these particular pieces or about Catawba pottery in general? What makes it unique and distinctive?
Well, from my end, it has the distinction of ancestrally being made since before the colonists came into the area. And I've had elders tell me that the King's Bottom clay hole site is the place to get pottery, that their pieces just don't work when they get them anywhere else. And the piece you saw earlier was a piece that was of the black snake is often featured on our pottery. And a lot of people get confused about that and want to know what type of significance is. We were woodland Indians, so nature, the woods is where there would be turtles, there would be birds, there would be the black snake, there would be a number of animal effigies that were often seen in Catawba pottery. It's never done on a wheel, and it's smoothed with river rocks from the very river that flows by the clay vein. And it's fired in outdoor fire pits. So it is truly a unique art form. And, you know, I'm always in awe of it.
Yeah, would you like to add something?
Well, I see the snake pot is on the screen right now, and there are only a handful of tribes that I'm aware of, and we have over 500 tribes in this country. So a lot of tribes, some do use the snake in their pottery or in their art, but not a lot that I've seen. So I love that about Catawba. The black snake is a symbol of strength. Warriors had black snakes tattooed on their bodies, Catawba warriors. And what I've been told in the community is that the snake protects what's inside the pot. I mean, practically, but the snake is just a symbol of power and strength and protection for the Catawba Nation. So I always love to see these snake pots. You see those a lot. Something else you saw the horse pot. And then the King Hegler or Chief Notkahe pot. Chief Notkahe, again, the most notable chief for the Catawba Nation, and he's the only chief whose motif is in Catawba pottery. And I don't know if we have a picture of that in the slides, but again, you can Google that, and it's really beautiful to see Catawba honor their ancestors that way.
I'm always stunned when I especially see the collections that you all have down at the Culture Center, just the skill level of work that's done and built by hand, smoothed by hand, just the coloration and the technical skills. For someone who's a very bad amateur potter, I'm so let's move on to talking about the process that led to the preservation of tract. So how did the Catawba Nation and the Open Space Institute begin this conversation? I guess who approached who? And what were the shared values and visions that informed this collaboration? And last but maybe not least, what challenges did you face then and overcome to accomplish this significant achievement?
You can.
Do you want me to go?
Yeah.
Well, and we can pull up the slides again. There are a handful that kind of help tell this part of the story, I think. But I would say that this collaboration started first with a property that was imminently threatened by development, and that the family, the Nisbets, really had moved away from the property, and the patriarch of the family had passed away, and they had made the decision that they needed to sell the property. And it had been under contract with a developer that proposed about 1,000 homes on site. Catawba were very aware of this property as this part of the story was happening. Ultimately, Lancaster County Council denied the zoning request for this development to move forward. And there was a moment in time where the property went back on the real estate market, back on the open market. At that point, I got a call from South Carolina's director of the Conservation Bank, an agency fully focused on protecting land in South Carolina. And he said, Mariah, there's this property that is so important. It's important for its natural resources, its value to the river, and its cultural resources that needs to be protected in Lancaster County. And he had a relationship with the Nisbet family and did a friendly introduction. And I had the chance to sit down with the family, and the family was really excited about a conservation outcome for this property, in particular one that resulted in it becoming a state park. They were so enthusiastic about this idea that they offered to donate most of the value of the property to ensure that outcome. So about 2/3 of the property's value was to be donated, and about 1/3 of it was to be purchased. Well, early on, the first call I made when the family signed up for this outcome for the property was to Winona. And it was a cold call, probably late on a Friday afternoon, Winona, if I'm remembering correctly. And the first thing Winona said to me was, Mariah, Catawba want this property too. And really my heart sank in that moment to think that this outcome of the state park might not be the first choice of Catawba. And so we decided we needed to sit down as soon as possible with state parks, with the nation, with OSI, to talk about if it made sense to move forward with this as a state park. And if that was an outcome that the Catawba would be interested in becoming partners on. I feel like I should hand this part of the story over to Lydia and Winona, because this is early trust building days.
It is early trust building days. And as most people on this call may be aware, Indian tribes in this country don't have a great history with governments or just outside entities in general making promises that they keep. It just doesn't happen. So when we did have that first sit down, I'd never heard of OSI. Poor Paul, the park ranger, love him. He brought stuff from state parks to, give. And I remember leaving saying, Winona, you can have mine. You can, you can have mine. I just, you have your guard up, especially coming from a Native community and working in this field. And for tribes, you're always a little bit skeptical, but you coming to the table was the first step, and it was a beautiful thing. Winona, I'll let you share your first thoughts, and then we can talk a little bit about what happened after that meeting.
Well, I think you summed it up pretty good. I would probably be wrong if I didn't say that I came very skeptical. And I remember Paul sitting across from me, and he said he didn't know whether to sit or run. It was very, I guess my gaze was a little bit too strong. But after talking with Paul and Maria, then things got comfortable, and we warmed up, and we've established a very, very good relationship working together.
Yeah, but that was, Rose, I would say, was a challenge. Is just establishing that trust. But when I encourage people, ask questions. Being the only federally recognized tribe in South Carolina, Catawba Nation, everything is an uphill battle with the state, with the local agencies, just in general, because there's a lot of fear of, well, what does this relationship look like? What's it supposed to look like? Law enforcement, for example. That was an uphill battle, even though tribes across the country have been doing law enforcement in their communities for decades now, centuries really, but Americanized or Westernized for decades. And so it takes a lot of education, but OSI and state parks coming to the table to approach us to say, let's have a conversation. That's the first step. And we respected them so much just to be all in the room together. But a lot of discussions, and then where we went from there was its own challenge of, can we trust them? They're saying all of these great things. And we also were high with emotion, because in that meeting, we all realized we are not getting this land back. This is not, is this a win for Catawba Nation? And ultimately it is. It absolutely is. And I, again, respect and commend them for coming to the table and us working together to come up with a solution. But we had to pass the next hurdle of, can we trust them? And that we did that through establishing regular meetings. We can talk about the agreements that we set up, but we really had to go off good faith. Are they going to keep their word? And so the next step in that was establishing an agreement, because I remember talking to the lead attorney saying, how can we, trust what they're saying? Let's put it down almost in an MOA or an MOU, but let's make it practical. We are going off of their good faith. Let's call it a good faith agreement. And let's just put in there what we all at the table are agreeing that these are our goals. And that's what we did. And it was up from there. But establishing that I would say that consistency of communication was key to gaining our trust, that we could trust OSI and we could trust South Carolina State Parks. And they actually took the time to listen to us and to go out on the land, and just they've been wonderful to work with. But it didn't happen. That trust doesn't happen overnight.
Can you also describe the steps in the process? So as you're building this trust, and doing that generative labor of building those communication relationships, what other steps have to take place to take such a large tract of private property and protect it in this way?
Do you want to go ahead, Mariah?
Sure, I'll talk that through. Lydia's right. I mean, the earliest steps were ensuring that this was an outcome that Catawba wanted to be a partner on, and that really was the impetus for that first meeting. If there had not been a meeting of minds, I think OSI and state parks would have stepped away from this agreement and from this property. It would have remained on the open market. And that was a hard decision probably for Catawba, because if it had remained on the open market, it would maybe have been possible that they would have secured it. I think that in that meeting, we saw the shared values that everyone coming to the table had. We saw the potential for a partnership to form around those shared values. And that's really what propelled the rest of this partnership. But the work of securing a piece of threatened property in sort of a short amount of time, we had about 6 months to purchase the property at this greatly reduced price. And we had to figure out how we were going to move forward with our partnership and agreement. We had to prepare a public announcement that we knew would need to be ready. Gosh, Lydia and Winona, probably 2 or 3 months after we'd started our every other week Friday meetings that we've had for months and months, almost years at this point. And we had to go out and secure all of the funding to allow that closing to happen in time. This was a sort of incredible case study for how a project like this gets done, in that we ended up with state funding. Most of the funding that came to the table was from the State Conservation Bank, but also a local foundation, the Eris Foundation, a corporate partner with Duke Energy, the county, Lancaster County, came to the table with $400,000, and a private foundation, the Knobloch Family Foundation, which is a sidebar, really cool Davidson connection, and that Eleanor Ratchford has been a former board member of Davidson, and this is her family's foundation, which is focused on wildlife conservation. So those entities all came to the table while we were still sorting out the details of Catawba moving forward on a really detailed archaeological assessment. We were already starting the conversation for the next steps of what co-management and co-stewardship might look like. But we knew the most time-bound piece of this was to be able to show up in November of that year and actually close on the property.
So a lot of meetings, as Mariah alluded to. And the great thing about this, in that first meeting we had, and it was held at the Culture Center, Winona's, where Winona works, and OSI and South Carolina State Parks and tribal leadership at the time. And yeah, we realized we're not going to be able to get what we want, but how can we all work together to accomplish those shared goals, like Mariah said? And that's really what this is about, is working together to make sure that this land and the clay vein is preserved, and that the land is protected for centuries to come. And OSI and South Carolina State Parks, all of the meetings we had after that, meetings on funding, trying to get the land, OSI, they always stay to their word. And that again further established that trust that, oh, they they do mean what they say. But it was interesting to me to be involved in that process too, Mariah, because I'd never attended meetings like that. And we were here and we were there, and it was really interesting and really beautiful to see all of these foundations and groups coming together to help fund the property to preserve it. And then we had a celebration at the end of that to mark that step in the land acquisition.
Yeah.
Ask a follow-up question to that. When you use this term protected or preserved, what does that mean in terms of this being a future state park? And I know when I've had these conversations with students on campus, one of their questions is, when can we go? And part of that is that not all of this site will be open to everybody. And how are Catawba leaders, state officials working together to envision this space as one in which Catawba sites are protected, but then part of it, right, will be a state park that is open in general?
That's such a good question. I'll answer the question about what do we mean by the properties protected, because that's actually a really good question that we often sort of skip over. When we talk about permanent protection in the land trust community, we mean that there is a legal instrument in place that dedicates this property permanently to conservation purposes, which in this case include the protection of natural resources and cultural resources. And so that is in place with the funding that has come to the table to secure the property. The second question, I feel like Lydia and Winona, you all should answer, because that's more about the stewardship of the property, the long-term commitment to how these resources are going to actually be protected and stewarded and taken care of over the long haul in perpetuity. So I'll let you guys take that one.
I would say I've always had a saying that's come up many times that things upset me when people do things for us and about us, but without us. And I think what helped me to become very comfortable about this stewardship is that being asked, how would you like to interpret this? And I really appreciated the fact that it wasn't, you get X amount of time to put your 2 cents in and then forever hold your peace. It was, we're going to go down this road. We're going to tell the stories of all the the cultures that come on this land. It's not just us. And that when we find things that need to be interpreted, it's not a one and done. And that's what really made me feel like this is a win-win.
So practically speaking, there is a legal instrument on part of the property that the clay vein is on. There is a conservation easement. So that property can't be developed. It has to be protected, preserved. And that's how it is protected. This easement runs with the land. You can't develop it. There are terms within that easement. But further to that, we're also establishing a co-stewardship and a co-management agreement. And that's what Winona is referring to. And these have become extremely popular in the last several years or last decade between the federal government and tribes. And so we're like, we can do it with the state. Why not? Because again, we want the same outcome. We want to be able to preserve and protect parts of this land. Yeah, the tribe had to come to terms with, we are not getting the land back. And we had to explain that to our citizens, but explaining to them that the second best thing is happening. Everyone is committed to not developing this land, to preserving parts of this property for Catawba to access, to continue to gather their clay, to continue to perform ceremonies, but also to continue or to create a pathway to share our story and our history with the public in South Carolina. So this is the first time in South Carolina history that a tribe is working with the state to tell our story that will later become this state park here on this property. So it's a beautiful story, and I want other tribes and other states and other entities to just use this as an example of what can happen. Everyone, it may not be the number one outcome that you thought you wanted, but this is the next best thing. We can all work together to accomplish our shared goals and vision for the property. And so just practically, how will this be protected? The clay vein, when this becomes a state park, the clay vein won't be accessible by the public, for example. We want to protect that. We don't want, it's a sacred site to the Catawba Nation. So like any sacred site, we don't want to put a sign to say this is a sacred site, because so many people seek those out and disturb those sacred sites. And the only reason that clay vein is still functioning and giving clay is because the Catawba people have preserved it so well generation after generation, and we don't want to disturb that. We do know that there's river cane on this property that we're cultivating at the tribe, and we want to preserve where the river cane is growing naturally along the river on the property. So those are some practical pieces that will be in the co-stewardship and co-management agreement, and will help the tribe preserve certain parts of the property. Winona also mentioned there was an archaeological study. So there may be parts of the property that will be protected, maybe by using natural resources, that will be off limits to the public. So this will be a shared space, but there will be some private parts of the space that will be preserved to preserve the sacred and cultural and natural resources located on the property.
Keeping an eye on the clock, and our time together is going so quickly, so I'm going to ask one last question for Winona and Lydia to address before we open it up for Q&A. So please go ahead and start popping your questions into that Q&A box. So for the folks who are watching, who almost all have some tie to Davidson, what do you want them to know about how the Davidson community can both support the Catawba Nation in its efforts to foster cultural preservation and environmental sustainability, and initiatives like this? If you can give everyone a takeaway about how to be good neighbors to the Catawba, what would you like folks in the Davidson community to know?
Well, for me, I think dialogue is very important. Before I met you, Rose, and through Teresa Dunlap and Rue Warren and Aaron Bumgarner, I, got an email saying Davidson College wants to meet with us, and I'm like, oh great, what is this going to be about? So when we started the dialogue, that made a world of difference, because it's very, I don't know how to put it, but it means a lot when somebody else feels as strongly about protecting things, and to know that that's not part of their heritage, but they care. That kind of makes you feel like you're connected to people that feel the same, that these things are important, that it's worth, preserving.
To echo Winona, dialogue is so important. Communication, as I mentioned before, just ask, come to the table. We're still here. But also in the title of this event, land back. Tribes really want their land back. And so if you know of, and all of these lands are traditional to the Catawba Nation. Catawba was all the way up in Virginia, all the way down in South Carolina. I mean, it was an expansive tribe. And so we've worked over the last 5 years diligently to try to get our land back. But the tribe, had always had limited resources to do that. And they're just now finally able to try to get some of their land back. But I mean, we had a recent victory in the last year or so. I would say, Winona, that the state of South Carolina did give us some land back, and that was unheard of, and just such a huge blessing to the tribe. But we want to see more of that. But also, we love partnerships, and this preserving this land is a partnership. So maybe, yeah, we don't get the land back, but maybe we get a say in what happens to the land, because the land is important to us. And so maybe there's a family out there, like there was here, who that maybe the landowner wants to do this or that with the land. Well, the Catawba Nation is open to partnerships, and open to saying, hey, can we help you co-manage this land? Just like in this situation here, I just, again, this is just a beautiful example of maybe the tribe ultimately doesn't get the land back, but we'd rather have a say in how the land is stewarded than not, because of the importance of the land to the nation. So again, just coming to the table and having communication with the tribe, and establishing a partnership, we would love that.
We've got some great questions in the chat. Maria Patterson, do you feel comfy unmuting and asking your question?
Yes, I do. Thanks very much. Very informative and interesting program. My question, and it was one of the first things that was said when you were reviewing the history, going back, I think it was 1840, there was a reference to citizens who were supportive of the Catawba's efforts to get back some land. And I'm curious who those people were, and if there's any idea of what their motivations were, because it's sort of a surprising it was a surprising statement to me that I heard.
Well, Nona, can you speak more to that?
Well, I'm not like Rose. History was not my strong point, but what I've been able to find out was that it was a group of individuals, and I would have to ask our archivist if they even know the names of this group of individuals, but it was sort of like more of a I guess somewhat not a collaboration, but people that felt like, oh, this is a wrong that needs to get changed, and they can't, they can't not have somewhere to call home. So all I know at this point in time, without doing a deep dive, and I'm sure our archivist could, is they were noted in the books as Friends of the Catawba.
So we may have an answer for you at some point out of the research we're doing, because as we said, the records on this suggest it might be some folks involved with the Presbyterian Church out there. Brooke Bauer, the Catawba Nation's historian, who's written a wonderful book called Becoming Catawba, that includes beautiful scholarship about Sally New River. Y'all should read it if you haven't already. Has been a wonderful resource for us, not only in trying to make sense of the role of Davidson founders in the dispossession of the Catawba Reservation, but also their role in education and reform movements of the time, which included removing Catawba children from the reservation to go to Carlisle Indian School, but other efforts that were sort of put under this blanket of quote unquote friends of Native people. So certainly that question is on our radar screen, and I hope within a few years that we could have some specific answers if those folks have ties to the Davidson community or the larger Presbyterian community in this region. So we've got a few other good questions. Shall we go Anna, Michelle, and then Molly? Anna, are you there?
Hi, yes, I'm here. I wanted to ask, so you mentioned being the only tribe registered in South Carolina and just having to navigate your own way to work with your state and what that can look like. I'm curious if you know of any other instances where this model of co-stewardship rather than the land back method has happened in other states, or if you know I don't know. It seems like not a novel idea, but I haven't heard of it. So, yeah, just curious if you looked at other instances where this happened, or if you think it might take place more in other states, or yeah.
I think it's happened on the West Coast, either California or Washington State. But working for Indian tribes, you have to be very creative because you lack resources a lot of times. So just like how we were at the table and we thought, what's the next step? Oh, we're gonna go off their word, and we're all gonna have good faith in each other that we're gonna stick to our words. Let's just draft it up in a document. Won't really be legally enforceable, but let's do it anyway and have everyone sign. Same thing here. We're like, we want to do a co-stewardship, co-management agreement. I mean, why not? I mean, no one says we can't. But after that decision was made, there was a lot of research put forth to see, is there a lot out there? And what we found is there wasn't a lot out there, specifically on this, like between tribes and states. But we can take what is out there between the federal government and some tribes, and then also some of those West Coast examples, and then also and use those as like best practice, and then put some terms in there that apply to the Catawba Nation. And so when I want to mention, there was an archaeological study done on the land. There was also a flora fauna study performed on the property. So there's extensive work that still needs to be done on the property for the spring season. But we're really just the nation was really just creating something. But there's a few examples out there, not a lot that we found.
Wow, I'd like to ask your question. No, okay, I'm glad to read it. So Michelle asked, there's ongoing litigation regarding sacred site protection at the federal level, including the situation of the Apache stronghold, as well as potential Trump executive orders and administration view shifts on the federal government's trust responsibility to tribes. So Lydia, perhaps this is a good question for a lawyer. How are Native nations, including the Catawba Nation, preparing for potential changes with this new administration?
Yeah, since I'm no longer with the Catawba Nation as deputy tribal attorney, I can't speak to what they're doing now, but I can speak to what tribes, including the Catawba Nation, have always done. This has always been the case for tribes. Federal Indian law is always described as a pendulum that it fluctuates, goes back and forth. And so sometimes you have a administration that's kinder, or a Supreme Court that's kinder to Indian tribes than another in other years. And so tribes are used to having to defend their tribal sovereignty. And we always say we've existed since time immemorial. So we will continue to exist and continue to fight to preserve and protect that sovereignty.
Lydia, I might add to that we, as in regards to the sacred site on this property, we've had the chance to work with Lydia and Winona, even outside of the co-stewardship agreement, on an irrevocable license over the entire area of the clay pit and surrounding it that goes with the land. I mean, it really sort of supersedes who owns the land. Even if the state of South Carolina stopped to exist, we would hope that the legal instruments we're using are gonna stand the test of time, regardless of administrations.
Molly, would you like to ask your question?
Sure. First, thank you so much. Really fun to hear this story. Thank you, Lydia and Rose and Winona and Maria. So Molly Pickle, I'm class of 2005, and I've had the opportunity to spend my career in philanthropy and land conservation. And Anna, to your earlier question, a couple good examples to that. I spent a lot of my career with Trust for Public Land, and we were able to do a land back project with the Kashaya band of the Pomo Indians on the California coast. And Trust for Public Land is currently doing a 30,000 acre project with the Penobscot tribe on lands that are adjacent to the Katahdin Woods and Waters. So we are seeing more of that, and I'm sure Maria has examples from Open Space Institute. But my question that really piqued my interest from this was to understand, or my interest in this, joining this conversation today, was to hear a little bit more about how Davidson is actively partnering with the Catawba tribe in land back. If there's anything you can share about what might be on the horizon. This is just such a wonderful example of figuring out the compromise with the King's Bottom track. And so I'm curious what Davidson might be coming to the table to do in partnership.
I'll jump in. We are so excited to consider the possibilities of what land back could look like. As far as we know, no college or university that was established in part through profiting from the dismemberment of a native reservation. In our case, Davidson's founding families being involved in the land fraud that dismembered the Catawba Reservation. And so we're at a phase in this relationship where Davidson College, in partnership with staff at the Catawba Cultural Center, are organizing a handful of events each year. Those include talks by Native authors. Judith is going to send out some information about that in the fall. We always have a feast that is prepared for lunch at Commons and then served for dinner at the Catawba Cultural Center, featuring a menu created by a Native chef. So we have a programming component to our collaboration. In addition, the staff at the Catawba Department of Natural Resources have given some staff and faculty at our farm, in our Department of Biology, at the Van Every Smith Galleries, a wish list of projects that they need research support with. Lydia mentioned the importance of river cane to Catawba artists, in particular for basket weaving. And so we have some students working with Kevin Smith in biology on forest restoration and river cane restoration, and trying to help the nation's Natural Resources Department come up with a plan for how to manage and best protect and encourage the growth of that resource. We have students working on the college farm and also down at the Catawba Nation's Black Snake Farm, growing and help rematriating a traditional Catawba variety of corn called Coos. So this work is ongoing. Like I said, we're in year 2 of a memorandum of understanding that in itself was a couple of years in the making that I think we all hope to renew. But the real challenge ahead of us is to understand the history of our college in relationship to our Catawba neighbors, and hopefully a few years down the road, when we have some sense not only of which of the college founding families, but to what extent they've been involved in this process, is to think as a community what our obligation is, and to listen to our Catawba partners about what an awareness of that history actually means. Folks on this campus have asked why we don't have a land acknowledgement, and my answer to that is because we don't know how the land was dismembered. And so we have to begin this process with an understanding of that history. And then as Winona and Lydia and Mariah have suggested, listen to what our Catawba neighbors would want and how we can move forward together. And so I hope we can think of this panel as the first discussion of many that include not just folks on campus and in the nation, but our alum as well, as we consider what those possibilities could look like 5, 10 years down the road.
Great. Well, I think we are at time, a couple minutes over. And so I really want to very much thank Rose and Mariah and Lydia and Winona for taking this time to speak with us this evening and leading us in this conversation. Clearly, there's much to discuss, and you've given us a great deal to think about. A follow-up email, as I think Rose mentioned, will be sent out in the next day or so. It'll have a survey and then some of the follow-up information that was shared here during the call. And it will also include a list of some events that are coming up in the spring. I think we'll show that here on the screen too. But again, this will be in the follow-up email. So know that there's lots of great things to keep the conversation going even after tonight's call for those who are interested. This event, just for folks to know, was recorded and it will be available on our website that lists all of these virtual courses probably in about a week or two. And so we will send word out when it's there, but you should also absolutely go back to that website at any point to check out this recording and all the classes that are going to be there and be recorded. So just again, wanted to so very much thank this wonderful panel. Thank you for sharing your stories and sharing your insights. And thank everyone that's been on this call for joining us this evening. And we hope that everyone enjoys the rest of their night. Thank you.
I will.